Welcome everyone. This is a huddle, so this is supposed to be a small gathering where we all are cuddly. And I'm glad that this space is, all of you are here and small crowd, but still really cozy. I would like to give a introduction to Anoma today, and I have prepared this plan, which is I'm going to start with what is Anoma, an overview of the ecosystem, the journey so far, and the roadmap for 2022. So first of all, what is Anoma? I'm pretty sure many of you struggle a little bit in answering that question. But Anoma is a suite of protocols and mechanisms for self-contained, self-sovereign coordination. The only three words that matter here are protocols for coordination. What is coordination? Coordination is basically any interactions between two or n parties that result in a net positive end state for everyone involved. What does that mean? So let's say you start with state 0, where Alice owes Bob $50 for dinner. So you start with state 0, where Alice and Bob are not happy. So how do you move to state 1, where Alice sends Bob $50 to settle for the dinner bill, and where both Alice and Bob end up being happy? So what enables this transition from everyone being unhappy to everyone being happy is a coordination mechanism. Let's start with another state 0, which says Alice has shitcoin A and wants shitcoin B. Then Bob has shitcoin B and wants shitcoin C. Charlie has shitcoin C and wants shitcoin A. So we start with the state 0, where Alice, Bob, and Charlie are really unhappy. And how do we get a state 1, where Alice, Bob, and Charlie all get the shitcoins they respectively wanted? So what enables this transition is a coordination mechanism. This is also a coordination game. Coordination mechanisms, there are tons of them. They existed way before we had distributed ledger technology and peer-to-peer systems. And all of them can, depending on what properties they enable, they can come with different trade-offs. And all these properties, whether it's centralized or decentralized, whether it's privacy preserving or not, whether it's censorship resistant or not, whether it's scalable and to how many parties, whether it's asset agnostic or it requires or is dogmatic about which assets are required, whether it's generalized or specific, all of these properties are the ones that coordination mechanisms could enable, and they come with different trade-offs. But Anoma is particularly interested in all of this. The one I want to focus on is one that is actually not so discussed in existing coordination mechanisms. It is about expressivity. So say that in the example above, where Alice has, instead of wanting to be shitcoins, so imagine that there's a coordination mechanism that will be enable this kind of coordination between Alice, Bob, and Charlie, but where NFT A is actually a CryptoKitty that has orange fur, that's green eyes, a helmet, and has dragon wings. Very specific set, a very specific CryptoKitty. And where NFT B is a CryptoKitty as well, but it has at least 4 traits that at most 0.5% of all CryptoKitties in existence have. This becomes a little bit more expressive. And another NFT C could be that it could be any NFT, but it has to have been owned by Elon Musk's account within the 24 hours. And it should be trivial to find out which accounts were owned by Elon Musk, because Ethereum is really not private. But it's about enabling more expressivity in what it is that can be coordinated in this case. Or in the example before, where we spoke about Alice sends Bob $50. What if the transaction could be a little bit more complex, as in under the hood, it actually requires an exchange. For example, in this case, Alice only holds ETH, but Bob only holds DOT. And so a coordination mechanism is a little bit more expressive, will enable this thing to be expressed, and it will handle this trade, in this case, logically under the hood. Another type could be that let's say I want to do this transfer, I want to do it with any asset, but at least I want it to incorporate the cost of carbon. Or it can get even fancier, as in I want to send 50 USDC, but I also want to do a donation to a DAO, and I want to gift, and I want to gift a private transaction to a random user. So Expressivity can enable really cool things, but it has some requirements as well, as it requires data. This data needs to be verifiable on chain, and the expression of the wants needs to be computable. However, I really want to focus on this aspect of coordination mechanisms because the fact is that current coordination mechanisms are really reductionist. Here's an example. I bought Lederer chocolate. It is a Swiss brand. Have you had any of it before? None of you. You have some. You had some. Okay. So I bought this chocolate, right? But recently I found out that Lederer, the company, actually rejects same-sex partnerships and opposes abortion. And this really sucks because I just wanted my chocolate and I honestly want it out of politics. I don't want to be involved at all of this. But the fact is I bought this without knowing and I ended up supporting a company that has certain political stance. So we started with a state where I say like, this chocolate is great, right? But it ended up in a state one where it really sucks, made me feel awful. I even gifted this chocolate to other people. And whatever coordination mechanism that enabled this state transition is just terrible. So we need to really move away for something that's reductionist. There are many other interactions in real world where, day-to-day we may do all this all the time, as in, for example, here's a transaction where Alice pays $5 for coffee, and the information that gets sent up the supply chain is usually just coffee equals $5. But what is not sent is everything else. What made Alice choose this coffee was that it was from a local shop, that the supplier was paid a fair global market rates. This shop actually spends 5% of the profits in providing shelter for cats, and that Alice was willing actually to pay 30% more for this particular coffee. But all the information that gets sent with existing systems that are reductionist is coffee equals $5. So there's this dynamic where demand does send information to supply, but it sends it through this very thin, low bandwidth coordination mechanism. And what is transmitted was this low bandwidth coordination mechanism able to transmit is just dollar values or really compressed values. And it would be all fine if the supply side had the incentives to not do harm, but the reality is that a lot of cases the supply is mostly incentivized in just maximizing profits and nothing else. And so this ends up feeding this loop, creating this loop of as long as demand only feeds in this compressed information, then the supply, all it's going to do with this information is do things that make more money. If we all lived in an environment of infinite capacity, infinite resources, if we die, we just restart the game like in a video game, none of this will matter. I will be right now doing MEV, to be honest. But the reality is that our world doesn't work that way. So our decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis with the current coordination mechanisms end up do result in really inefficient systems and really negative dynamics. For example, collective action problems, underfunded public goods, resource depletion, environmental impact, social traps, multipolar traps, you name it. So what if we were able to leverage coordination mechanisms were more expressive, and that way we were able to make commitments that are more expressive and allow us to actually express what our preferences are. For example, an ephemeral expression of preference would be, I want a cup of coffee today. From a local coffee shop, the supplier was paid a fair global market rates. The shop spends this much to shelter abandoned cats and we're willing to pay more. What kinds of dynamics would it enable if this is not just ephemeral, but it was a persistent expression of your preference? Imagine that you could actually program your wallet or your bank account to behave this way. where they say, I only want to buy goods that incorporate the cost of carbon. So the technology that enables this to understand how the dynamic is created. For that, you can Google overview of Anoma's architecture, and that will provide you just a quick explanation, high-level explanation of how Anoma works. So if we're able to do this, we'll potentially could moving from this dynamic where the information that we send from demand to supply is very low bandwidth to something that is higher bandwidth, where we're not only sending just monetary value, but we're sending something that is a little bit more multidimensional. What kinds of dynamics could that create? There are other things that behave similarly. So, for example, in democratic systems, we vote. The mechanisms that you use for vote are also low bandwidth, as in the voter votes yes or no, and then on the other side, the information that of the coin is the party in an election. If the party election is maximizing has only the incentives to be elected, then if the information the voter is only whether I get voted or not, or get elected or not, then I'm going to continue doing things that maximize the chances of me getting elected. So what could happen if we're able to increase the bandwidth of information between a voter and a party in an election? Another thing is a pretty curious dynamic that we currently have, which is we're all citizens of a particular country or sovereign state, and we all pay taxes. And the only information actually that we can give to the government by paying taxes is just how much we pay. And then in this particular case, it's a lot of times not clear what it is that the government is feeding back. But what kinds of dynamics could it enable if, as a citizen of a country, we could actually increase the bandwidth of I'm not only paying taxes, but I'm also particularly care about this set of public goods, or this set of values, or this set of end states. What kinds of dynamics could that enable? Anyways, there's more about this on the vision paper. So if you would like to read it, I really recommend it. Okay, let's jump into the Anoma ecosystem, very high level. So the ecosystem is growing. You can find ways of being involved by coming to the huddles. There will be more huddles in the next months. But also digitally, you can join us via many other platforms on anoma.net. You can find the list/community. The Anoma ecosystem, besides the entire community, it is formed by a couple of entities. There is the Anoma Foundation, whose purpose is to steward the ecosystem and provide resources and guidance. There is Heliax. So all the team members you've seen here are team members from Heliax. Heliax is a public goods lab that builds vertically integrated products and are capable of acting as alternatives to exploitative paradigms. And there are our backers. The journey so far it's been a bit over a year. Heliax started with 15 people in Q1 last year. There were a bunch of raises. In between, we released a white paper, open source the code base. There was a very special first physical event at ECC last year. And towards the end, we actually released a Feigenbaum public testnet. But after the entire year, we kind of realized that there are a lot of constraints around here, as in Anoma's architecture is novel in many ways. And it has a lot of components and is really complex. Some components require a little bit more time, while other ones are ready. So this is really hard. How do we do this, and how do we actually communicate effectively about the technology and the protocols that we're building? Which led us to, early this year, build Namada. What is Namada? Namada is a fractal instance of Anoma. It is a layer 1 that is proof of stake with BFT consensus. It enables multi-asset shielded transfers, as in all assets can share one anonymity set, including be it fungible assets or non-fungible assets. It connects to IBC compatible chains and Ethereum. it is vertically integrated. Actually, we have a presentation about front ends, and it has incentives for shielded transfers. The roadmap for the rest of the year looks like this. These are really rough roadmaps. We started working on Namada, and we had been having some internal testnets. This month, we've been a lot in Amsterdam. There will be public testnets coming, instant devices as well. We will be, if any of you are planning to go to E2C, we're going to be meeting there again. There will be a trusted setup ceremony beginning sometime in summer, and mainnet launching hopefully before end of Q4. And that is it. Any questions? Great. Thank you.